Sometimes we get tested to see if we're in the kingdom of God by treating Jesus as king of our decisions. Have you had your daily drip? Welcome back to season 3 of the Daily Drip podcast, where we create kingdom content that builds community. I'm your host, Aaron Levy, and let's squeeze them scripts for that daily drip. Hey, today's drip is King. We're already in John chapter 18. If you're new to the community, drip stands for Devotional Reading for Insight and Practice. We read selected verses from each chapter of the book of John for this season. We're already in John chapter 18, and then the reoccurring theme or word in that chapter is called the drip. We talk about it, we practice it for the week. Let's lock in John chapter 18. Starting at verse 33. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say this to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your only nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "So you say that I'm a king." Let's stop right there. So Pilate and Jesus are going back and forth on this word king and kingdom. And notice that Jesus never claimed to be king. He just kept talking about his kingdom. What humility. Because he could have took Pilate out like this. Pilate would have just been done. And Pilate was a punk. We'll get into that in a moment. But look at the humility of Jesus right here. Being falsely accused. In front of Pilate, Pilate is asking him questions about his identity, and Jesus is not forcing that on Pilate. But Pilate has an invitation to believe Jesus. I believe it's in Matthew, where Pilate's wife gave a warning about Jesus, and Pilate has a very important decisions to make about the kingdom, because sometimes we put the crowd over the king. So Pilate, let me back up. When we talk about king in today's society, because we don't have a king in America, right? But when we talk about king, when we look at the Bible, just think about it as being at the height of your purpose. Like King David went from being a shepherd to being king of the Jews, right? King of the nation of Israel. So when we look at his calling, there were different assignments that he was doing. Jesus would test his character, and the ultimate fulfillment of you being king or queen is you being at the height of your purpose. I talk about this because the culture describes it. Page 90 of the book. We got Michael Jackson, the king of pop, LeBron, the King James, Beyonce, Queen Bee, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. So you're the king or the queen if you're in the area and you're the top of the game. Now, you could be a king and just be the best father. A queen, you're the best mother. A king, you're the best painter in the Inland Empire. Whatever that is, whatever you're at the fulfillment of your calling, the height of your calling is kingship. Now, we know Jesus is king of the Jews, but the people have a problem. The crowd has a problem because, hey, since you're king, aren't you just supposed to make my life better? The Pharisees have a problem. Hey, since you're king, you're taking a lot of attention off of us and you're not following our rules. So that's why he's falsely accused right now. He's blaspheming. He's not the Son of God. No, you're insecure because now with Jesus being king, you feel like you don't have your right leadership role. So here's Pilate. Pilate don't want none of these problems, man. He is highly political because he's supposed to be the friend of Caesar. So that's how they get him trapped up, because they're like, "Hey, Pilate, do what we say or we're going to snitch on you to Caesar." And there's more on that. But let's just talk about how this relates to us. Here's some insights on how we look at this conversation with Jesus and Pilate. Pilate had an opportunity to treat Jesus as king. And here's how you treat Jesus as king. You honor him no matter what the crowd says in front of you. So he was at a crossroads. Because what ends up happening is he has the authority to declare Jesus is king, to declare Jesus is innocent and let him free. If he does that, boo from the crowd. The crowds will hate him. His political officials will hate him because it wasn't popular to say that Jesus is king. How does that flesh out at your job? How does that flesh out in your family? How does that flesh out with your decisions? Sometimes we get tested to see if we're in the kingdom of God by treating Jesus as king of our decisions. Jesus as king on what we say yes to, what we say no to, and not allowing the crowd to dictate that. I said it on page 92 of the book. Unfortunately, we too can be like Pilate and choose the crowd to be king of our lives. Although we have access to Jesus through his word and prayer, the temporary instant gratification that can come from pleasing people is a strong temptation we must overcome in decision making. Now, I want you to think about Pilate, because it's very easy to be like, man, Pilate, man, you were weak, dude. You didn't listen to your wife and you did all these things. But wait a minute. If you just think about last week, what are some areas where you didn't treat Jesus as king? The first thing that's coming to my mind, I didn't treat Jesus as king last week at times because of my attitude, because of my thinking. Since I know Jesus is on the throne, since I know I have a good shepherd, when things don't go the way that they're supposed to go in my mind, Jesus is inviting me to trust him as king. Or I'm just thinking I'm the king, and since I'm the king, it shouldn't go this way, therefore it should change. So Philippians chapter 2 is a great chapter to read if our mindset is not focused on the king. Because when we think about King Jesus, or we think about a king in general, we think that the king is luxury, and the king has influence, and the king has everything he wants. But if you think about Jesus, Jesus was mocked, betrayed, spit on, crucified. Why? Because the king represented his love for the people he was leading. So if you want to be a great leader, you serve people to the point of pain. That's the role of being a leader. And Jesus says, hey, the teacher's not greater than the master. If they hated me, if they persecuted me, they gonna hate you too. So if we want to be in the kingdom of God, if we want to do anything great in this world for God, we got to recognize the higher we go in leadership, that doesn't mean that things just go our way. It's actually the opposite. It's that we are here to serve the people under our influence and be obedient to Jesus. Philippians 2 talks about emptying ourselves, taking on the form of a servant, and then Jesus was obedient to the point of death. What's that for us? On a daily basis, we die to our flesh so we could be obedient to Jesus. I want to ask a question here on page 93 of the book. It says, look at this question. Pilate ignored his wife's warning and chose political safety over truth. Have you ever ignored wise counsel or a prompting from God only to regret it later? What did you learn from the experience? Man, this wasn't even planned, but the first thing that came to my mind when I was reading this question about ignoring wise counsel, I remember I had a girlfriend in high school, and my parents warned me, hey, you probably shouldn't be with her. Hey, you probably shouldn't. And I'm like, you don't understand love. You don't understand. I'm going to marry her. And I had all these plans and so forth. And that was such a terrible relationship that not only did it have pain for me in that season of my life, but in like years to come. So I ignored that wise counsel because I tried to be the king of decision making instead of including wise counsel. Pilate had an opportunity. Jesus is right in front of him. But also his wife says, hey, I had a dream about this situation. Leave that man alone. And he ignored that. So that's how we're going to practice this week. If Jesus is the king of your life, do you include him in decisions? Since Jesus is the king of your life, Do you include community around you, that when you're stuck with which decision that you make, that in the multitude of counsel there's safety, there's Proverbs, and that you heed that counsel? Let's focus on making Jesus the king of our decisions this week. Stay dripping, my friends.